Now this, you can kind of see how by lightening the shell, enabling it to move faster, enabling it to eventually swim, there's a distinct advantage to that. Um, their classification would have that animal, that benthic, heavy-shelled benthic predator, evolving in a very short time from this free-swimming squid-like form into that, and then back into a squid-like form again. So essentially, again, parsimony. More steps are required that I think are completely unnecessary. Um, so now I'm going to just be. I don't want to get into again too much of. I've already gone into way too much detail, and I'm just probably just not making a whole lot of sense. If it does, I hope I'm glad if you guys could follow me. But essentially, I'm always very suspicious of taxonomies, of phylogenies that are first of all based on not there's a 90 something specimens. There's a lot of specimens, but it's based on basically one taxa. That bothers me. It bothers me that when the authors ignore things that, if they acknowledged, would add a whole bunch of steps, necessary steps, into their storyline. But you can't ignore those things. One of the big ones is the fact that this species doesn't have a radula. Now, radula is the tongue of snails, octopus, squids, and things. Chitons, they all have this structure called a radula, which is it's a tongue with hard parts on it that are used to scrape sediment. Also, in some species, it's used actually as to deliver poisons, like an octopus. So this radula, this species doesn't have a radula. Now the authors conclude that maybe it's poor preservation, meaning the radula didn't preserve. Now it's true, radulas don't preserve as often as shells do, but they do preserve. I would be surprised that in 91 specimens they were able to identify things like mantle cavity and gill structures, but not one radula could be illuminated. That's a little fishy, in my opinion, no pun intended. In other words, they're not. A radula is thought to be a unifying thing that all mollusks have, and other things that are alive, that were alive, that are extinct mollusk relatives also all had a radula or radula-like structure. So by not having this structure, that they can't explain away. Basically, they simply explain it by stating that either it secondarily lost its radula in the species, or it's just too poorly preserved to show the radula. I have a big problem with that, simply based on you can't have it both ways. Either the specimen is so beautifully preserved, they're specimens, that you can discern all of this evidence that you indeed have found a fossil cephalopod with these fine little tiny microstructures that make it a cephalopod, except for the one key thing that makes it a mollusk you can't find. That do you see if that makes sense? The other issue that I have with it is the fact that they state in the article, they redefine this new family, this Nectocaridae, as a division of cephalopoda. So they define it as a cephalopod. They put it in a taxonomic framework with a few other mostly Chinese fossils from the same, that the Chinese version of the Cambrian. I think it's the Shang fauna. I believe I might be pronouncing that wrong. But they put it in with one of those, and in particular, let's see here, Vetustoveramus, this guy. Now this one's been also well described, and in fact, the authors of Vetustoveramus have stated that they also believe that theirs is a mollusk or mollusk relative. And of course, the author Smith and Caron say that it's in the same group as theirs, ignoring the fact that Vetustoveramus was a benthic form with a foot that it crawled upon. And the most important thing, this is it. This is where I'm going to get into. Okay, it comes down to, now you may not know this, but invertebrate zoologists, we are obsessed with the ass. Okay, we're not really obsessed with it. The anus is a critical thing in invertebrate taxonomy. The anus, obviously, you know why it's important, but its evolution occurred early on, in metazoan and evolution, and it's so tied to so many other features that we can actually trace a lot of relationships by how the anus develops, how the anus and the mouth develops, what kind of digestive system an organism has, tells us a whole lot about what it's related to. The genes that turn on and off during embryonic development are highly conserved when it comes to the mouth and the anus. Okay, that makes sense. And one of the things about mollusks that makes them I'd say crappy design is the fact that the anus of a mollusk is tied to the sense organs of a mollusk. Okay, this means that the anus. Well, here's my anus, or not my, but here's my mollusk anus. Next to the mollusk anus is things like their gills, and their sense organs. They're not the eyes necessarily, but eyes are easy in developmentally. But their sense of smell, their chemorecepting organs are near the anus. Now that seems like a stupid thing, a stupid design, but it makes a whole lot of sense if you can think of a mollusk as being derived from a burrower. Okay, picture that. Okay, I'm sorry. Picture a worm. Okay, here's a worm buried in the sand. This worm has a mouth at one end. It eats mud. Just imagine this. I'm not saying this is how it happened. I'm just saying imagine it. So this worm's got a mouth at one end. Food goes through its digestive system, and it excretes out on the surface. You've seen worm castings at the surface, right? So worms eat on one end, excrete out the other on the surface. That's completely logical. So picture, though, if you were a worm that needed to breathe, you need to have gills to breathe water, right? Your head's down in the mud. The deeper you go into mud, more often than not, you hit anoxia. You hit where the water can't circulate. There's not fresh oxygen down there. So it's a good idea to have your gills at the back end, right? The end that's closest to the surface, or sticking out of the surface even. And this is very common in benthic animals. In faunal animals that burrow in marine habitats. So their gills are there. Sense organs. Why would your sense organs be there? Because that's the part that's up. You need to know, oh, here comes something that wants to bite. Here comes a trilobite that's hungry. You want to be able to pull back into the sediment again. You want to be able to pull your back end down into the sand where it's safe. That's kind of a good model for early mollusk evolution, if that makes sense. In that this having the sense organs out because they were burrowing animals. However, that kind of gets hardwired. It's kind of fixed in mollusks as a whole. Even though now mollusks don't live that same lifestyle, they still have this problem of having their sense organs and their anus tied together developmentally, and their gills actually. But more important for this is the anus. Now some mollusks have actually derived a new type of gill from another existing structure and just got rid of the anal gills altogether. Others have developed new sense organs. Others, like gastropods, simply turn their entire body into a U shape so that the anus is now above the head, which is really, really bizarre, but it makes a lot of sense if you look at this developmentally. And cephalopods have taken the same route as gastropods do. It's not torsion; it's a different thing. But so cephalopods. The anus of a cephalopod is, if you ever see an octopus, there's the mouth underneath the tentacles. The anus is there. The anus is where the funnel is. Okay, that's what this comes down to. The funnel of an octopus or a squid, where they shoot water out of, is a modified posterior margin of the foot. That's where the anus empties into. So the anus empties out, and the gill. Water goes over the gills there as well. If you look at the diagram that the authors give of this species, they have the funnel up near the front in the mouth. They don't have an anus illustrated on it. But if you look at the related species that they claim is a related species, the anus is at the back end where it belongs. Okay? So in this, what I'm getting at is that the authors of this paper would have you acknowledge, or you have to accept that even though in all modern cephalopods there's this weird backward arrangement of having the anus and the funnel empty out in the front of the animal, that this primitive early one had the anus emptying out the back and the funnel up front.